like you can just use the cities as metonyms. You can say there's
Sure.
a civil war in Russia between Moscow and Kiev, right? The regime in Moscow, the regime in Kiev, they're both obviously regimes. Everything is regime. And it's not pejorative, you know, it's objective. The eastern bank of the Ukraine has basically been, you know, part of Russia since, you know, Pocahontas was a little girl, right? You know, then there's another part that was basically part of Poland and also Austria-Hungary. That part has been, but you know, but the cities were all basically ethnically cleansed. There were Jews. There were all kinds of people in the cities. The cities speak Russian, and there's this sort of strange peasant language, which used to be called Ruthenian and is now called Hungarian, Ukrainian, which is a kind of a distant relative of Russian. It's like French versus Spanish. And you know, the importance in the life of the Ukraine, say, like of Ukrainian, it's like the importance of like French in Canada or something like that. Like there's definitely a bunch of, you know, hicks planting radishes out of the country who speak it. Generally, they also speak Russian. And basically all of the attempts to promote this other language have been like the lingua franca of the Ukraine is Russian. And all of the attempts to sort of promote this other language have been sort of transparently motivated by generally diabolical political goals. You know, so the Germans are the first to create the state of Ukraine. It comes out of this in 1917, not the Nazis. It comes out of sort of, you know, how the like mid 19th century, like romantic nationalism, you know, Poles sing songs about Poland. Actually, most people don't know this, but the Ukraine has a national anthem. And the national anthem, the first line of the national anthem can be translated in a number of ways, but one of the more common translations is Ukraine isn't dead yet.
Oh.
Which, so you're basically looking at this sort of very marginal thing constructed out of like sort of this linguistic residue of like the ninth century that is found basically only in areas, you know, involving a lot of hay, that has been created basically a couple of times in recent history as a country, which had never existed before, basically always in something like an act of war against Russia. And so basically it's not quite like Texas, because Texas doesn't have a big linguistic minority. Well, as Mexicans, I guess, you know, and it's actually a little bit like basically you split off Texas into its own independent country, and the official language of Texas becomes Mexican, I mean Spanish. And the like, you know, then there's all this like Texas nationalism that sort of merged with like Mexican nationalism in a way. And the whole thing is basically, you know, run by a couple of guys out of China, right? You know, and that's sort of what you're looking at. So sort of the existence of the separate state, it's like Alsace-Lorraine, you know, for Germany or for France, depending on who has it. Actually, they all speak German there, you know, and so it's like this, you know, first of all, you're looking, let's go back to the lawsuit frame. You're looking at, you have this fucking car you stole from me like 30 years ago. Okay, you didn't steal it from me. You basically came to my door and were very belligerent and bought it for like a 20th of its actual price, right? But like, you know, I've always felt that this transaction is fundamentally illegitimate and that the Ukraine is part of Russia and what the fuck, okay? Because it was not like, nobody treated it as, you know, in the Soviet Union, it's like, you know, going between Kiev and Moscow is like going between like, you know, Tennessee and Kentucky. I mean, you know, right? And there aren't even like different laws. There's like, it's part of this, it's a line on a map. And so then you have, okay, not only does this exist, but basically there are enormous amounts of basically 2-3 things coming from the West in this state. There is enormous amounts of political influence, as you can see from the leaked Victoria Nuland call. The State Department is basically picking Ukraine's new government. I'm sorry, you know, the Kiev regime's new you know, political officers, and certainly picking the leaders of, you know, setting up opposing coalitions, doing stuff that's basically like, if that was being done by a force within the country, that force would clearly be one of the most powerful forces in the country, right? Number two, you're basically arming the smaller country with weapons that are clearly superior to the weapons of Russia. In fact, the way Putin describes it is you're essentially trying to create an anti-Russia on Russia's doorstep. So imagine basically it's like the Chinese are arming the Canadians, right? And they're putting like hypersonic nuclear weapons, that can like blow up, Biden in like 45 seconds, and they're mounting them in Toronto, right? And it's the future that China has more people, it has more money, it's like in every way more powerful than us, and they're thought to covet California, right? Because we owe them all this money, right? So it's a charged and dangerous relationship. The U.S. is very much on the back foot. And here is the sense that Canada is kind of being armed as an anti-America. Canada, by the way, is governed in the Chinese fashion. The streets are immaculate. Heroin is published by like burning at the stake, right? So, totally different Canada. And, this Canada is starting to boom. They have, there's a lot of Chinese investment coming in. They have, factories with whatever, right? So as America in this situation, you're very much on the back foot and you feel that this is very much sort of an attack. And so you develop it because it's hostile to you, you become hostile to it. And then it's like, look, why do we need all these arms? We need all these arms to defend ourselves against the US Army, which is massing provocatively on our borders. Typical Anglo-American, method of smashing weaker powers, which I call, kick the dog until it bites, and then call it a mad dog and shoot it, right? Mm-hmm. And so basically, Putin, this is what's going on here. Putin is being constantly kicked, and and Russia is being constantly kicked. And there's this great Twitter thread of like, American great international relations gods from like George Kennan, John Mearsheimer, Henry Kissinger, 3 ambassadors to Russia, 2 secretaries of defense, all quoted as saying, it is insane to provoke Putin by expanding NATO in his direction. There's absolutely nothing that you're getting at it. And they regard this as an existential threat. It's like, suddenly Texas, you have this independent Texas, and it joins the Warsaw Pact.
Right, okay.
The fucking Warsaw Pact. And it's like, basically, don't mess with Texas or like Russia is going to nuke you, right? And like, that's a very threatening and unpleasant situation. And there's no cause for them to do that. There's nothing other than sort of some kind of predatory motive it's just bad behavior. You don't set out, you don't set up man traps outside your friend's house, right? That again is a violation of natural law. And so basically Putin is acting on this basis. And, whereas America is acting on the basis of basically mid-20th century international law, which is that basically any dog that bites is a mad dog, and it probably is going to eat not only you, also your family. So it's just bite you, it's going to kill you. It's not just going to kill you, it's going to eat you. And it's probably going to eat all of your family as well. Dogs are carnivores, and possibly the whole community.